With World War I behind us, let's get into the 1920s. In May of 1920, a factory was robbed, the paymaster was shot, and the payroll was taken. Now, when the police investigated the crime, it seemed obvious that a local gang had done this, but the local gang paid protection to the police, so the police weren't going to arrest them. Instead, they investigated the crime by going through a list of subscribers to an anarchist newspaper. Now, keep in mind, this is just a robbery. It had no political implications at all. They just didn't like anarchists. They found two men that didn't have confirmable alibis in Sacco and Vanzetti. These are both Italian immigrants who there's not much evidence they actually even knew each other. And they charged him with this crime. They put him on trial. The judge was a man named Webster Thayer, who was a wealthy Bostonian from an elite family. And he called Sacco and Vanzetti from the bench during the trial the anarchist bastards. He basically refused to allow any evidence that might exonerate them, and the jury found them guilty. When the foreman of the jury was asked if he thought they had actually done the crime, he responded by saying, "I don't know. They should hang anyway for what they believe." Vanzetti would say, "I have suffered for things I am guilty of. I am suffering because I am a radical, and indeed I am a radical. I have suffered because I was an Italian, and indeed I am an Italian." It was ignored at the time of the original trial, but when it came up on appeal, it began to get covered in some of the muckraking journalism and became an international scandal. Protests were held against the decision in Argentina, France, and Italy. And some of the great artists of the period, the writers John Dos Passos, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and the painter Diego Rivera, even the scientist Albert Einstein, all publicly fought for their release. The state of Massachusetts set up a government panel to review the decision, but they put in charge of this panel the president of Harvard, who was also the leader of the Immigration Restriction League and a deep bigot against immigrants. Sacco and Vanzetti, despite worldwide protests, were executed on August 23, 1927. And so many things that make the 20s are included in this story. The intense anti-immigration, the fear of radicals, the insistence on conformity, the loss of freedoms that had been won during the Progressive Era, and of course the culture war which so much of the decade centered around. Dos Passos said on the anti-radicals, they are stronger, they are rich, they hire and fire the politicians, the old judges, the college presidents. It tarnished America's international reputation as the land of the free. One Danish newspaper said, "America, which formerly was the country of liberty, has now begun a role, that of reaction, which is preparing to assume world hegemony." And that's exactly what's going to happen. In the popular imagination, of course, it's the roaring 20s, the jazz age. You might think of flappers and speakeasies and legendary gangsters like Al Capone. You might think of it as a time of extraordinary economic growth and wealth. It was a time of experimentation and rebellion. Radio and film would become dominant, spreading mass culture. Consumption will explode, as we'll talk about. But all of this papers over not only the wealth and equality, of course, but the ethnic, racial, religious, class, and urban-rural tension that is the heart of the 20s. And one final note on the 20s before I get into the chapter proper here. The 20s is the beginning of the modern as well. And when I say modern here, I don't just mean current. That's not really what modern means. Modern is considered a period historiographically. And the modern world is at least the first world that I, as somebody born in 1972, understands in any real way without having to go back and study it. By 1920, a majority of Americans live in an urban environment, not a rural environment. The vast majority of Americans work for wages. That means they get paychecks at the end of the week or the month. This has a lot of implications. They're not making their own stuff at home in the way that they had in an agrarian society. And if you're living in a city and you're getting a paycheck, you're going to the store and buying your groceries and your clothes and your soap or whatever. This is a really radically different way of living. It's also a time when, for the first time really, most Americans will live in close proximity to many other people, which is radically going to change not only our day-to-day lives, but the way we think about the world and other people and politics. It's a time where consumption really takes over, where we're going to begin to think of freedom and just the very function of our lives in terms of what we're able to buy. It's a time where mass media and mass entertainment begins to take over. The radio will will nationalize news and culture in a way that had never been the case before. Media will combine with sports to create the intense interest in the sports leagues that's going to dominate the 20th century. While sports, of course, have always been of interest, you really couldn't follow the New York Yankees or Major League Baseball the way we think of it today until we get to this period of mass media. So I just really like to make this point that so many of the things that we take for granted, like the underlying substructure of our culture, our day-to-day lives, and our society, really don't begin to come together until the 1920s. Now, I would also suggest that the modern is over and we've moved into something else. And so for my younger students, this won't be as familiar to you as it was to me. You don't live in a world that's dominated by a small group of mass media. Perhaps you've lost interest in the big national sports leagues. Evidence certainly points that you have. So depending on your age, this may be the first time where you really think, oh, I understand this world. Or it may be the world of your parents and grandparents, something that you're vaguely familiar with, but you're growing up in a different world, a world that's dominated by digital interaction. And just very different ways of living and experiencing the world.